Hello, back again. Today we're going to talk about Miller's Chapter 9. It's about economic growth. A lot of Chapter 9 is about things that we've already talked about or touched upon. We're just going to kind of groom things together and help build up our understanding of all those things really with this chapter and maybe add a couple of small things to it. That's why I'm not in my homemade, um, very high end, I know, recording studio. I would just be using my good old trusty whiteboard here for a couple of small things today, and it should be a fairly light day in terms of if you're concerned with seeing sophisticated models or things that are hard to follow. Today isn't one of those, so feel good about that. I'll try to make it as interesting as possible sitting here in my office, but doing what I can do. Uh, the chapter is about economic growth. And so, with economic growth, the first term we really need to look at or define is a recession, which we talked about with GDP already. The old definition of recession is still being used by a very ivory tower kind of high end source, investorwords.com. The old definition was a period of general economic decline, specifically a decline in GDP of two or more consecutive quarters. That's from investorwords.com. Really, we're in a recession according to in the Recession Dating Committee or the Economic Cycle Dating Committee at the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Researchers, says we are. Another more sort of boilerplate definition of recession is a period of declining GDP and real incomes associated with high unemployment. Now, that's something that's always worth making sure we review and everybody's clear on that. When economic activity, as measured by this thing called GDP, is falling, it's a very strong likelihood that unemployment is rising because less stuff is being made, fewer workers are needed to make less stuff. So unemployment tends to go up when GDP tends to go down. That tends to be something that goes hand in hand. Now, something I notice students do a lot is they refer to unemployment as employment. And you have to be careful with that because they tend to move in opposite directions, right? When employment is going up, unemployment is likely falling. Or when unemployment is going up, employment is likely falling. So you have to be a little careful with those terms. I see things written and I hear people say things when I know they mean to say unemployment, but they're actually saying employment. And, that's a very different creature, very related creature, but in the opposite way. So that's just something to be a little careful about, a little mindful of. And when you're reading your questions on your homework and things like that, make sure you're making that distinction or you'll be getting things wrong and probably not understanding why if you're thinking you can use the term employment and unemployment interchangeably. It just won't work. So that's what a recession is. I think that's all review and all very comfortable. I'm going to circle back. I'm going out of order of my notes, which are available. I'm going to circle back to the model that comes next in my notes just because it's a very simple thing and I think it would be nice to be a standalone video distinct from this sort of introductory thing about economic growth. So in my notes, I now define a very important term that I want to work to in pieces. Okay. With GDP, we made a distinction between nominal GDP and real GDP. The difference between nominal GDP and real GDP is the effect of inflation over time. Nominal GDP is stated in today's prices, the final value of all goods and services within a country's border in market prices. That means today's prices. To get to something a step more meaningful, we get rid of the inflation effect and get to real GDP. Real GDP gets to those goods and services at some earlier prices, so we compare the growth of the goods and services over time rather than comparing what might just be an inflation effect over time. It's a more meaningful measure of a country's standard of living to get from nominal GDP to real GDP. Now, to get even closer to a meaningful measure of the standard of living, we have to do another thing to it. What we do is we take that real GDP and we divide it by the number of people in the country. Because think about it. Let's compare two economies that we hear about quite a bit in the news, China and the United States. We are roughly at the same sized economies now. I think the United States still has the size of the economy a little bit on China, uh, but I actually think we're close to being passed by China in the size of our economy or our GDP, and that would be, and I'm talking about real GDP, the goods and services produced within the country's borders. But what's another difference? What is a difference between the United States and China? We have about 320 million Americans, and there are over a billion people in China. So your GDP per capita is markedly different. And in thinking ahead a little bit on this video, I actually went to look that up, and I found a list of countries' GDP per capita from the World Bank, which I didn't look up the history of the World Bank, but from my more internationally focused days, the way I remember it is the World Bank is an organization designed to provide economic stability around the world, and it's hosted by the United Nations. They're a good data source for international data. So I started looking at this list, and I kept getting more interested. And I thought I was going to look at like U.S. and China, and then I thought, well, we have a lot of students from a lot of different places, and different places have different characteristics to their economy. So I started getting kind of carried away. I saw Canada, and I thought, well, Canada is comparable to the U.S. in many ways. People are always interested in Canada. It tends to be something people focus on with the healthcare discussion, I know. So I wrote theirs down. GDP per capita in Canada, 46 in U.S. dollars. Okay, this is all in U.S. dollars. 46,194.7. And then the next one, because I was in the seas, I saw Chile, and I thought, South America, let's get a convenient sample of a South American country. 14,896.50. So, what is that? Canada has 3 times the GDP per capita as Chile. And then I got to China, because I was in the seas. Any thoughts out there? What are you predicting with what you know so far? Want to circle back? Let's circle back. Let's hold off on China. Let's go to Colombia, because I was in the seas. And I was in South America, but I noticed it was kind of different than Chile, so I thought that was interesting. It's only 6,432.40. And then I thought, Congo Republic, the continent of Africa, let's look at that. $2,011.10 is GDP per capita in the Congo Republic. And then I kept scrolling down in Finland. I thought, Scandinavia, people tend to be interested in Scandinavian economies. We tend to hear, I think, a lot of good things about Scandinavian economies. 48,685.90. So far, they have the highest GDP per capita of what I've rattled off here, more even than Canada. Japan, strong economy, 40,246.90. Then I was in the J's, and I saw Jordan. And I believe Jordan is an oil exporting country. I thought that would be interesting. I could be wrong. I'm not sure about the economy of Jordan at all, but I grabbed it because I was in the J's. Why not? 4,330.30 cents. So above the Congo Republic, but not even up with Colombia. Then I continued to want to focus on the continent of Africa, and I grabbed Kenya, 1,816.50 GDP per capita of Kenya. Then I wanted to go up to North Africa, so I started to make some deliberate effort. I grabbed Libya. I wanted North Africa because of the oil exporting effect. I wanted to see if that would result in market differences in GDP per capita. I grabbed Libya, 7,683 and 80 cents. Egypt, $30,020. No, I'm sorry, $3,020. $3,020 is the GDP per capita of Egypt. Mozambique, $491.80. Less than $1,000 per capita GDP in Mozambique. Also, an interest, always in the news, and an oil exporter. You might know, Russia, $11,505 GDP per capita. Back to oil exporting countries with my focus, Qatar, $64,781. Qatar is on par with, right now, it is the richest of the list I've read so far. South Africa, wanted to hop down there since I was on the continent, had been on the continent, and I wanted to get more of a sampling of that continent. So $6,001.40. UAB, United Arab Emirates, back up in high numbers again, 43,103.30. And oil exporting country, while I was up there, I wanted to look at, in the oil exporting countries anyway, I wanted to look at Saudi Arabia, 23,139.80. So now this leads us back to where we started. China, 10,261.70. That's what it means to have a lot of people in your population. Even when you are neck and neck for the largest economy in the world, you are not neck and neck for real GDP per capita. What is the United States? Of course, I saved that for last because I do like to try to build a little suspense. 65,118.40. So it is the highest GDP per capita of the list that I saw. And I didn't deliberately choose a list for which everyone is lower than the United States. That's just the outcome. Interesting, Qatar is number 2 of the list, the convenience sample that I grabbed of the list there. And that's all from the World Bank. So that's some backup information about our best measure, economists' best measure of economic well-being of countries. And we can compare these, as I just did, in space, right? That's comparing across space of the globe. Or we can compare things, and oftentimes this is more interesting, in time, right? Because if the United States real GDP per capita is 65,118, an interesting question is, well, what was it before? Maybe 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. What are we doing, right? That's always an important thing. And that's where I'm going to go in just a second. But before I do, I want to point out one other problem with this measure of economic well-being. And I'll bet some people watching this even grabbed that, latched onto that problem, hearing about some of these countries on this list. This is taking the real GDP of a country and dividing it by the number of people. That's it. That doesn't tell me that anybody in the United States is consuming exactly $65,118.40 worth of goods and services. It doesn't mean that. It could be no one is consuming exactly that. So what I'm getting at is it doesn't tell us how these goods and services are distributed in an economy. And some of these countries, I suspect, Saudi Arabia, for example, 23,139.80. I assume that there are some people who are consuming, a lot of people who are consuming much less than 23,139.80, and a few people consuming much more than that to arrive at that number. And that is how the goods and services might be distributed in an economy. The number doesn't tell us that, which is a problem or a challenge with real GDP per capita. But it's still a decent measure of economic well-being because of the way it can change over time. That at least can tell us how an economy is doing on a per capita basis. So here we go on that. I found when I looked at the Bureau of Economic Analysis, economic growth in the United States was 1.9% back in 2013, 1% in 2011, and from 9 to 11, it went from negative 4.4 to 2.2 in a range. And we've already looked at U.S. GDP growth or changes. The per capita thing isn't really an issue because the population is fairly stable in these short periods of time, right? So it's just about the real GDP growth in short periods of time. And we looked, and we know with the coronavirus, we're very volatile now. We were down 32%, back up 33%, which, as I mentioned, I want to do another piece on this, does not get us to where we started. I'll explore that in another piece. Just so you know, in the longer term, U.S. real economic growth from 1965 to 2005, according to N. Gregory Mankiw, was about 3.2%. So our long-term growth rate in the United States is about 3.2%, and that's what we can figure is kind of what we can expect with a lot of noise around that, because that's what it's been for 40 years, if that's what it was. From a later look, though, if we go back to from 79 to 2006, if we just cut that down in size, it's been lower. It's been at 1.9%. I suspect then if you extrapolate from 79 to 2000 through 2019, that would be higher. So you have to be a little mindful of that when you're watching your CNN or your Fox News. The bookmarks that are chosen, the ends of a time period analyzed, can affect your GDP growth rate of a country that you will get pretty markedly. I mean, going from 3.2 down to 1.9 by choosing different beginning and end periods, that's a pretty big difference. And so there might be bias, whether you're watching your CNN or your Fox News, in the numbers you get simply by picking them. If they pick a bookend when we're in a recession, you can get a very low annualized GDP because things are currently down. Or if you pick, I don't want to give too much away, but if you pick a peak, you could get a higher growth rate of GDP because things are up at that time. So just something to be mindful of. At this point, I'm going to stop recording this. This was a little longer than I really intended, but I was having fun, and I hope you were too. And I'll post some more. I'll make some more things, and I'll use my whiteboard to do that.